Let's begin with a story that's coming in from the United States of America, as the former U.S. President Donald Trump has been indicted for the third time this year, and this time in connection to the 2020 election interference probe that's been held by special counsel Jack Smith. Trump has been charged on 4 counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, also obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. Trump is now scheduled to appear at the Washington, D.C. federal courthouse on Thursday at about 4 p.m. local time, which means close to 1:30 a.m. India time. Now remember, Donald Trump has already been indicted by a Manhattan grand jury in the month of March for business fraud in connection to hush money payments that he'd made to adult entertainer Stormy Daniels. He has been indicted in connection with a classified documents probe in June, and this spells even more trouble for the Republican frontrunner ahead of the 2024 presidential elections. Let me now, in fact, talk about the key points that we are looking at as far as the indictment really goes. What we are given to understand is that the indictment against Trump is, in fact, the 4 points that we are looking at is that he's tried to create an atmosphere of mistrust after U.S. elections. In fact, the Republicans also tried to change U.S. election results for months. We also are given to understand that the former U.S. president lied even after he was warned by top officials. Donald Trump also knew that he is lying about U.S. election, and all of that was false. He was aware of all of that information. So those are the charges against him.
Today, an indictment was unsealed.
U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith announced the third indictment against Donald Trump in 4 months on Tuesday, this time arising from the former president's efforts to overturn his 2020 election defeat, which Smith said fueled the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol.
The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots, and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people.
The 4-count indictment alleges Trump conspired to defraud the United States by preventing Congress from certifying President Joe Biden's victory and to deprive voters of their right to a fair election.
You don't concede when there's theft involved.
Prosecutors wrote that Trump knew his claims that the election was stolen were false, but repeated them anyway to, quote, create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger and erode public faith in the administration of the election. Meanwhile, Trump leads a crowded field of Republican candidates as he campaigns to regain the presidency in 2024. In a statement, the Trump campaign said he has always followed the law and characterized the indictment as a political persecution reminiscent of Nazi Germany.
Our investigation of other individuals continues.
The grand jury indictment also alleges Trump conspired with 6 other individuals to overturn the 2020 election results. The co-conspirators were not named, but one of them appeared to describe former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, the former head of the Civil Division who tried to get himself installed as Attorney General so he could launch voter fraud investigations in Georgia and other swing states. Another alleged co-conspirator appeared to describe Attorney John Eastman, who erroneously suggested that Vice President Mike Pence could object to certifying the election results. It all adds to the growing pile of legal woes Trump faces. Tuesday's indictment represented a second round of federal charges by Smith, who announced a separate 37-count indictment against Trump in July over his retention of classified documents. In March, Trump was indicted in New York over allegations he falsified business records related to a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. He has pleaded not guilty in both of those cases and has sought to portray the multiple prosecutions against him as part of a politically motivated witch hunt. Meanwhile, Trump faces a fourth criminal investigation by a county prosecutor in Georgia into accusations he sought to undo his 2020 election loss in that state. Trump was ordered to make an initial appearance in federal court in Washington over the special counsel's latest indictment on Thursday.
The indictment is one thing, but to convict him is another. But every dog has its day. Everybody has their day in court. So it will be determined if he can fight a jury of his peers, which would be difficult, and to really get to the bottom and the truth of things, because no one is above the law.
I think it's an embarrassment for the country. I mean, that's the former president. He was just indicted on election fraud. It's pretty embarrassing, isn't it?
It's wonderful. I'm thrilled because, I don't know. Some people say the indictments are working for him and some against him, but I looked at the paper today, and according to statistics, he's beating Biden by, a lot.
It was a long time coming. This should have happened a long time ago.
One thing is that, as the indictment stated at the outset, that it's not a crime to just lie. In other words, we have a First Amendment right to be protected in our speech, and particularly political speech is afforded the highest degree of protection. But the indictment shows that Trump was not just lying about election fraud, but he used those lies in order to try to subvert the will of the people and to actually overturn the results of a lawful election. And so the indictment goes through in very painstaking detail how
Another indictment from U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith was unveiled on Tuesday against former U.S. President Donald Trump, this time concerning his efforts to undo his 2020 election loss to U.S. President Joe Biden. The court papers charge Trump with 4 counts. They include conspiring to defraud the U.S. by preventing Congress from certifying Biden's victory and to deprive voters of their right to a fair election. Now, the indictment itself, it gets into Trump's actions in the days and weeks after it became clear that he had lost the presidential election to Biden. It describes efforts to get state officials to prevent from certifying their election results, and his own attempts to get his vice president, Mike Pence, to not let the electoral certification of Biden's election win move forward when it came before the U.S. Congress on January 6th, 2021. And what's most interesting here is that this is conduct describing what he did during the past election as he once again runs for election to try and become the Republican nominee in 2024. And then, if he wins that nomination, to try and be back in the...
There's stuff in here that I know is untrue. I'm deeply disappointed. I thought I was dealing with professionals, and I am so disappointed. This Trump derangement syndrome takes away your ability to reason, and it takes away your ability to be honest. It's an illness. What they did here is an abomination that will live in history as one of the worst violations of free speech ever in the history of a country that used to value free speech more than any country on earth. We can't say that anymore.
Let me take this across to my colleague Sanjay Suri, who's now joining us on this live stream. Sanjay, first of all, the most important question, what kind of trouble does it spell for Donald Trump, especially ahead of the 2024 presidential elections? Now there are so many cases where he's been indicted.
This spells big trouble, and we are not just speaking loosely here. Big trouble for 2 reasons primarily. We've seen the seriousness of the charges, but the charges will only stick to the extent that there is evidence to back them. And here we have evidence from a witness as serious and as significant as the former Vice President Mike Pence, also in the running for nomination now. Mike Pence was vice president, and it was the attempt by Trump and his team to try and rope him into the undoing of the election results. Now we have evidence from Mike Pence that has been handed over to the grand jury, including his notes at the time and other records. The critical issue, of course, is not just that Trump did the wrong thing, but he was doing the wrong thing, knowing he was doing the wrong thing, knowing he was lying and misleading the public, or trying to do that deliberately. For that, evidence is what is critical, and Mike Pence, none other, is the key witness. And it's going to be very difficult now to discard or to disregard evidence from Mike Pence. The other reason, and the second major reason, perhaps even the bigger reason, that this really is big trouble for Trump is because the district judge is none other than Tanya Chutkan, and she has had a number of rulings delivered over this case. There was a case, in fact several cases, where the prosecution sought very strong sentences and severe punishment. She disregarded that argument and in fact, on the contrary, gave even more strict punishment than the prosecution wanted. Her view on this has been made clear several times. She has said Trump was president, he was not king, and she is going to be the judge in this case. This really looks like Trump is in for it now this time.